Last time on Just So You Know.
I wonder, do we even really stop to think about how the early church is doing things and what that must really look like? So the Megiddo Church is this really early Christian structure.
What it is primarily is it's a mosaic floor that's been preserved.
Archaeologists were able to identify this as a Christian space based on 3 key features. The fish were a secret symbol for the early church. The table.
And that, of course, is the Lord's table.
And the inscriptions. The one they call the Akeptus inscription. It is the earliest mention of Jesus as God outside of the Bible. But we got to talk about the dates. Based upon the archaeological data, the Megiddo Church dates to around the 230 AD.
Can't be earlier, really. Maybe 225 at the most. And then it goes out of use about 290 to 300.
Okay, you may be wondering why this date is such a big deal. Now, with the Megiddo Church being dated to 230 AD, that puts smack dab in the early church period. What's the early church period, you may ask? Well, after Jesus Christ is crucified and buried and raises from the dead, he then ascends into heaven. And once he is ascended into heaven, he sends the Holy Spirit. And when the Holy Spirit comes on the people who are following Christ, according to Acts, this is the birth of the church. And this is when the early church period begins, which is around 33 AD, which continues all the way up until 313 AD when we get the Edict of Milan. And that's when Constantine legalizes Christianity. And this is significant because there are those who like to say that the deity or the godness of Christ was not a thing until Constantine. And with the Megiddo Church, we can definitely see that that's not true.
People who are not believers, they don't want to believe that there was a firm faith in Jesus as God before Constantine because they want to associate it with politics. That's simply not true. We know they did from the early church fathers, and here's formal, full proof that they did. And this cannot be dated to the 4th century. It cannot, archaeologically. It must date to a point after 230, 225, but way before 300.
And y'all, this is why a date of 230 AD for the Megiddo Church is so important. Because with that date, we have something that gives us a firm knowledge of early church beliefs.
So what y'all really need to know is that this Christian gathering space, the Megiddo Church, is situated inside this Roman officer's house, which means that this church is gathered in somebody's home.
It's a home, but it's a home for the officers. It's apparently in the officers' quarters where centurions were living. So it's a public sort of, place like officers' quarters are in the military today. And it's the conversion of like an entry hall. It's not a house that's converted because this is a public sort of structure. So it's not really a house church in that way, but it is a place of Christian worship.
And this is not out of the norm. As a matter of fact, very early in church history, and I'm talking about before Constantine even started rocking his Jesus piece, churches gathered in people's homes. So what would the Megiddo Church have looked like? If we were to reconstruct it, it would probably look something like this.
The communion table would be in the middle, but then we would also have typical Roman furniture surrounding the communion table. Now, some of you may notice that this don't look like how we do church today. Well, that's because after Constantine, churches started taking on the look of the Roman basilica. Whereas before Constantine, churches would gather in something that looks closer to the Roman triclinium, which is basically the Roman version of a dining room. And so what this illustrates is that the early church would come together in spaces like this, lounging and eating and enjoying each other's fellowship as they gathered around the communion table.
And I like that image of people coming together around the table, because this is the core marker of belief in the church.
Now with the Megiddo Church, which dates to about 230 AD, we get a great picture of what the early church setting would have looked like prior to Constantine. And so when we read verses like Philemon 1:2, or 1 Corinthians 16:19, Acts 20:20, or even Romans 16:5, we should probably be picturing something more along the lines of this and not this. More like this, not that.
Church people don't understand the importance of a site like this for how we know the average believer approach things. This is no different than the people who go to church every day. And that's what people, I think, don't quite understand. This isn't a bishop writing this. This isn't, some learned scholar writing this. This is a Roman army officer producing a place for people to worship, and the women in the church put a mosaic up that said it's to the God, Jesus Christ. This says what they believed, and nobody can change that.
I love talking about archaeological finds like the Megiddo Church because they are great with helping us get a better understanding of the culture, especially early church culture. And I just thought it would be great to talk about it, if anything, just so you know.
So if you're looking for more information, check out these resources.